Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pause for Pedagogy, a conversation with Juan Guardia. My name is Lisa Endersby, and I'm an educational developer at York University in Toronto, Canada, and co-editor of Pause for Pedagogy. The ILA and I are thrilled to welcome Juan to our latest interview and latest conversation in the Pause for Pedagogy series. So welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So I'd love if you could start us off by sharing a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure, absolutely. Again, my name is Juan Guardia. I serve as Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students at the University of Cincinnati in Ohio.
Awesome. Thanks for being here again today.
Thanks.
We're going to start by talking a little bit about the key questions or questions you were hoping to answer in writing your article. So to start us off, tell us a little bit about those questions and maybe what inspired you to write this article.
Sure. So one of the things that I would say over the last 10 years that I've been trying to continually ask, not only in my current position and in other positions, has been when working specifically with Latino identified, Latinx, Latino, Latina identified students, is really a variety of questions. One, has there been influences of your cultural values within your leadership development or leadership positions? And then what type of additional knowledge are you bringing to that position that came from home, family, language, and so forth? So when developing and writing this article, I really looked at it from those two lenses, really incorporating not only the Latino cultural values that influence and inform a lot of our Latinx students' identity development and leadership development, but then in addition was, so what are some of the knowledge and lived experiences that you're bringing to the table from your culture, your family, home, and so forth, community, that have also informed your leadership with regards to who you are and in their specific roles, but specifically if they were in e-board positions and so forth for either their Latino fraternities and sororities and other organizations they were members of.
And that's fascinating to me as someone who has dabbled in the student affairs world for a few years, that we use that term holistic and holistic student or whole student all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those many buzzwords, as I'm sure you hear at your institution, just as we hear here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but the idea that holistic really means what are you bringing, not just who
Mm-hmm.
you are in the more fulsome picture, but what are you bringing into these new spaces and places. And I know that really resonated with me when I read your article, that it really speaks to leadership and students as a much more holistic
Mm-hmm.
practice than perhaps we give it credit for, which of
Absolutely.
start talking about it for hours. So I'm going to get back to our questions because I know we could talk about this forever. But let's
Sure.
track and let's keep this about you and your fascinating article. So tell me more about the pedagogy and the pedagogical theory that you discuss in your article. I know our readers are always really interested in the pedagogy and the theory behind what you're doing. So where did this idea maybe for this pedagogy come from, and how did it inform your advising practice?
Sure, absolutely. So I would say over 10 years ago, I was introduced by a fellow colleague in the field, a fellow scholar practitioner, and they asked me about my work when in advising the Latinx students when I was at my former institution at Florida State. And they said, have you ever applied or do you even know the funds of knowledge theory pedagogical framework? And I was like, actually, I hadn't. And so he sent me a variety of articles. And as I read it, it literally came to life off the page for me because I realized that what they were talking about, what the authors had developed, was really this legitimate form of knowledge that majority of students of color, in particular in the article, were Mexican and Mexican identified students, Latino students, the knowledge that they had developed, their knowledge that they had developed from their families, their communities, their culture, were actually the lived experiences that they were bringing to the classroom. So it was really initially brought out for to use in the academy, but my colleague mentioned to me, I've actually utilized it in my advising style and how I work with my students. And as I got to read a little bit more about it, I realized it was not only something that I was bringing to the table with my own knowledge and experiences from my upbringing in South Florida, specifically my Cuban nationality as well, but the students that I was working with, their identities ranged with a variety of Latinx identified nationalities, but what they were bringing were those aspects. They were bringing, and again, because I was at Florida State, a majority of my Latinx identified students were coming from South Florida and Central Florida. So they continuously discussed what it was like to be a Latino from South Florida or Central Florida, how that shaped their experiences, but then how they brought that to the table when leading their peers and planning programs. Because I would never ask them to put that on the back burner. I want that to be part of their overall identity and what they're bringing to the table. But also, they were talking about their experiences, what they learned from their family, and that specific culture, and how they were raised in an environment um, that really looked at community first and not so much as an individual. And so, really looking at it from that lens of, I looked at this pedagogy and said, this is literally how I'm working and advising my students. I just didn't know that there was a framework or a pedagogical thought that went to it. So I was super pleased when this was presented to me, because they just revalidated what I felt like I was doing already, but I also had now a theoretical framework that I can fall back onto with it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And it's interesting tension between the practical and the theoretical. And often here in my world as an educational developer working with faculty, we get faculty who talk about theory all the time, pedagogical and otherwise, but then how do you put that into practice? And so it's so interesting to see that other lens of, this is what I do, I know it's working, it's good practice, but like you said, there is a theory or a framework behind it. And
Yes.
less about the legitimacy and more the, like, I think I like the way you said about you draw something from it. There's a way
Mhm.
has power, has meaning, and it's something that can grow because there's an underpinning behind it that makes it relevant and important to the work that you're doing.
Right. Exactly.
What a cool serendipitous discovery. It's working. There's actually something behind it. People are writing about this.
Exactly. And
That's
when it's
awesome.
funny, when I first read it, it just seemed so simple. I was like, I'm first off, I was thankful that somebody came up with the theoretical framework, but I was like, wow, it's super simple. It's almost like when I first read Dr. Laura Rendon's validation theory. I was like, super simple, and I'm just glad somebody was able to come up with it. But the applying the theory to practice, to me, that's where, as a scholar practitioner, it really comes to life, because I really feel that what was put onto paper by these theorists that created these theories really informs my practice and how I was working with my students then, and how I continuously work with my students now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's sometimes the hardest and easiest part. Like, we just need someone to write this down. Just
Yes,
someone to talk about
absolutely.
it in a way that makes sense. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Great segue, though. We didn't plan this when you were talking about practice, which leads me to my next question. One
Sure.
of the pieces of practice that I know is common across a lot of these theories and a lot of this type of work is this idea of having learning outcomes or at least goals that underpin our practice or our pedagogy. So what were your learning outcomes for this practice or pedagogy, and how did you assess whether these outcomes were met?
Sure. So one of my several learning outcomes that I was thinking of over the course of when I was working with the students, were in particularly two when it came down to the application of Juan Borda's leadership theory with regards to incorporating Latino cultural values, and then secondly, the funds of knowledge framework as well. And so, in my advising style, I wanted to make sure that that was being implemented. But then I was like, okay, what are the outcomes and how will this be carried out? So for example, for me, my biggest aspect as an advisor in working with those students, I definitely wanted to make sure that I reinformed, validated, and empowered my students with the Latino cultural values that are an important facet of who they are, but also inform their leadership practice. For example, confianza, which is trustworthiness; familismo, which is the connection of family; being simpático, being congenial; respect, respeto, honesto, being honest, in that comunidad, that community for them. But then also fleshing out those lived experiences with regards to funds of knowledge theory, and how would they apply that to their work. And so in my advising style, I would make sure that I would flesh that out for the executive board. And then when I would, for example, attend an all board or all general body meeting, I was usually sitting in the back, but letting them serve in their roles. And what I would see was they were fleshing that out for their peers. So I can think of examples when they would have, for example, their general body meeting for the Hispanic Latino Student Union. E-board members would say, Stacy, I understand that you're from South Florida. What was your experience there? What is it you're bringing to the table here? So I'm seeing them make those connections. And then above and beyond that, so that's just at a general body meeting. But one of the things that I really was interested in seeing was how would they carry both the board of theories of Latino cultural values in their leadership and the funds of knowledge in delivery of items, for example, whether it be programming and things to that effect. And then how would that look like? And I saw basically a reaffirmation of these students with their peers. And so I can visually see in their conversations and hear from them um, some of the outcomes that I was getting really excited about. I'm like, okay, they're clearly applying this, not knowing there's a theoretical underpinning to this. But to me, that was a real exciting aspect of it. And then the outcome for me was in the delivery of the program. And so I know I had several students who were being mentored by members of the executive board, who for a lot of them were either first or second year students, and putting on some of these programs seemed pretty daunting, and especially on a campus. They were the largest Latino student organization on a predominantly white campus, and so it can be. Some of them were really timid. Some of them were a little nervous and worried. But what I saw was this leadership development coming from the e-board to those students, the reaffirmation of them doing well, of reminding them of where they came from and how that knowledge was legitimate and that it was also informing in their programming, to then finally going to the actual program delivered, and just seeing their excitement. I always say that students get more. It's one thing for me to pump up students with their excitement for their programs. It's another thing to see when they are doing it for themselves, and then them finally seeing the final product, their smile, their delivery. To me, that was my outcome. That was the delivery that I wanted to see. But over the course of that, I saw the ways and they were implementing that and making sure that they were reaffirming and validating their peers all the way up to the final delivery of a program and or meeting and so forth. So to me, what I saw in those outcomes was a very um, legitimate way of them sharing who they are, with regards to their lived experiences, their cultural values, um, but also that validation that many students we know seek that from their peers during their collegiate careers and after. And it always brought a smile to my face because I knew that it was happening, but they never knew the connections that I knew from a scholar practitioner perspective. um, and it was always to me what continues to bring my passion and my work with my students.
Oh, absolutely. And I can just picture you sitting in the back of the room watching them. And that's
Yes.
the ultimate outcome for a lot of the work, isn't it? To see them do these things, like you were talking about
Hmm.
before, to see it come to life, to see them paying it forward almost in a way.
Absolutely.
And that's such a lovely marker of learning, too, that they're not just
Hmm.
able to tell you, but they're thinking about Bloom's taxonomy, right? They're not just identifying or
Yep.
describing, they're really doing. And
Hmm.
powerful that must be for them and for you.
Absolutely. And one of the my philosophy that I'm always telling students is, always remember that campus is a small microcosm of what's going on in larger society. So if
Mm.
you're able to deliver programs that are tackling current topics that are going on across the country and across the world, and you're doing it at the collegiate level, you're not only informing your campus community, eventually you'll form in that case was the local Tallahassee community where Florida State University is located at. And then once you've graduated, you continuously take that experience on. And so learn and doing those programs there at the collegiate level really informed what it would look like when they would get out eventually into the real world of work.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we know those are your next steps, maybe for your students, thinking about the world of work and beyond that, but also
Hmm.
you've been thinking about and are really passionate about this work. So where do you see future research or maybe even writing headed in this area? What do you think you're
Sure.
writing or exploring next?
Yeah, so absolutely. So one of my interests, and again, my background is very much a qualitative experience. One of the things that's pretty unique to a lot of Latino fraternities, sororities, and also it's actually done in a lot of Black Greek letter organizations as well, is you have the opportunity to join such organizations at the alumni and/or graduate level. And so those would be individuals who either are currently in graduate school or have already earned their undergraduate degree and then can join at a graduate chapter level. So one thing I'm really fascinated to find out is what does that leadership development look like for older non-traditional students who
Oh, wow.
maybe
Yeah.
join these organizations at a graduate slash alumni level?
Hmm.
They may be professionals, they may already be in the world of work, but what does that look like once you've gone through the new member intake process at the graduate level, and does that inform your practice even though you're an established adult at that, for lack of a better word? um, I think there might be there's definitely ways that I see that implication just from some getting to know some other folks. I myself went through a graduate alumni process to join my Latino fraternity, and I've met others who have done the same, and I've seen their leadership capacity build as a reflection to joining their organization. But I've never put pen to paper and be like, okay, let me actually do a qualitative research about what this would look like. So that is something I'm definitely passionate and would love to see some results come out of that as well. And I think that's definitely where I'll be leaning towards next.
That's exciting. And who knows, you might find a collaborator or two after we put this out in the world for others
Yes, that would be phenomenal.
interested in that too. That's amazing. Well, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Pause for Pedagogy, as we know, is an initiative of the Leadership Education Member Interest Group of the International Leadership Association. All of our articles and videos are available at www.ila-net.org. And you can also follow us on Twitter at @the_ILA. Thanks so much, Juan.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.